Hello and welcome to my podcast, Bookopedia. I'm your host, Allison Bowers. Today, I'm going to be discussing the book The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. This book came out in 2017. The main character of the book, Star Carter, is 16 years old. She lives in a poor black neighborhood but attends a fancy suburban prep school where she plays basketball. On the drive back from a neighborhood party, Star and her friend Khalil are pulled over by a police officer. The white officer shoots and kills Khalil after Khalil leans into the car simply to ask Star if she's okay. While Star's classmates suggest that Khalil deserved it because he was a, quote, thug, end quote, and a drug dealer, the black community is enraged by the senseless murder. At first, Star struggles to speak up, but then she finds her voice to tell the world exactly what happened the night of the murder. The book The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas explores the intersections of race, gender, and class present in feminist theoretical frameworks, and how these social constructs present challenges for Star Carter's ability to speak up after her unarmed black friend is shot by a white police officer. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of gender in this book. And while gender isn't as explicitly explored in The Hate U Give as other factors such as class and race, I still think that gender plays a really important role in Star's relationships and also her position to stand up for Khalil. So like I said, there wasn't super obvious evidence linking gender roles as an important factor in this book. But if you look a little deeper than the surface, you would discover that gender really was a crucial thing to think about in relation to the intersectional challenges posed for Star. As a female, she has to fight harder to ensure that people believe what she says, and she also has to consider her gender to make sure she's safe throughout the process of standing up for Khalil. This really complicates the process of speaking her mind because she gets threats from the King Lords, specifically the leader King, who physically abuses his wife. And the King Lords are a gang that Khalil was supposedly a part of, but in reality, Khalil rejected the gang's offer to join, and he was only selling drugs to support his mother and his sisters. So first, there are a lot of examples of men in Star's life calling her Lil Mama, or some variation of that. And this pet name really diminishes Star's credibility and makes her seem like an innocent little girl needing to be protected. An example is when Devante, an ex-gang member Star's family takes in, says, quote, "I had to make sure you and Lil Mama were okay," end quote. Star feels belittled and annoyed when Devante calls her Lil Mama because she doesn't want or need Devante to protect her. Then, Star experiences being treated like a servant whose only purpose is to serve the men around her. In the grocery store, Mr. Lewis gives Star his honey bun and says, "Heat it up, girl, and you bet not overcook it." Because Mr. Lewis treats her in such a disrespectful and demanding way, Star purposely overcooks the honey bun and Mr. Lewis burns his mouth. Additionally, Mrs. Rooks, who's a regular customer in Star's father's grocery store, warns her father, "Maverick, you better watch out. These little boys around her gonna be trying it." By saying this, she objectifies Star and highlights her good looks rather than her personality or intelligence or any of her other attributes. Mrs. Rooks is saying that boys will only want one thing from Star, and that's sex. Star becomes an object for the male gaze rather than an individual with a personality. Unfortunately, as Hazel Cedar Troost argues in their article Reclaiming Touch, Rape Culture, Explicit Verbal Consent, and Body Sovereignty, the difference between sexual and non-sexual assumptive touch lies solely within a social map of consent that is neither natural nor universal. Because consent is often not asked for, women are seen as objects to be played with and used, rather than people who have sovereignty over their bodies and have the capability to say no to sexual advances. Finally, there's a strong theme of domestic violence. King, the head of the King Lords, physically abuses his wife, Aisha. He uses her for sex and not much else. He's physically and verbally abusive. She's ended up in the hospital numerous times due to King's abuse. This connects to what we talked about in lecture because King abuses Aisha to maintain power and control over her. He thinks he's not masculine if he doesn't dominate his wife, and he doesn't respect her because she's a female. Aisha can't escape, she has nowhere to go. She's also trying to protect her kids, who are also sometimes abused at the hands of King. She feels trapped because King would send his entire gang to find her if she tried to escape. At one point, King and his gang capture Devante and beat him up. Star and her friends find him. Aisha lets them escape. She goes back outside and distracts King, and she knows that King is going to beat her once he finds out that Devante is gone. To connect this to some class readings, according to the article Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color by Kimberly Crenshaw, race and culture contribute to the suppression of domestic violence. Women of color are often reluctant to call the police, a more generalized community ethic against public intervention. We talked about this a lot in lecture, where women of color don't want to call the police for a variety of reasons, including not trusting them or not having faith in them. Aisha had little faith that the police would intervene to help her escape her abuser, and also Aisha comes from a poor black neighborhood viewed as the ghetto, so if she were to admit she was being abused, she would contribute to the stereotypes that black men beat their wives. To support my claim that gender isn't given as much attention in this book as race and classes, Burnham, in the absence of a gender justice framework in social justice organizing, explains that a gender justice lens is rarely incorporated into the work of mixed-gender social justice organizations, so gender is often neglected or cast aside as a less important factor when considering intersectional struggles. In order to look at things from a truly intersectional perspective, gender needs to be considered equally with race and class. So now that we've discussed the importance of gender in relation to Star's situation, we should consider the aspect of class. Because Star comes from a poor neighborhood, she faces discrimination from her classmates who think she's from the ghetto, and people saying that Khalil deserved to be shot because he was a drug dealer. Star gets offended, rightfully so, when her classmates call her neighborhood the ghetto. She says, quote, "I can call Garden Heights the ghetto all I want. Nobody else can," end quote. By calling it the ghetto, Star reclaims what's supposed to be a negative label and accepts that she may not live in the nicest area, but it is what she makes it. When other people call Garden Heights the ghetto, Star feels disrespected and uncomfortable. There are very clear class divisions from the very start of the novel. Star feels this when she goes to her suburban school. She says, "I never invite them over. Why would I? They live in mini mansions. My house is just mini." Star does not invite people over because she's embarrassed of where she lives. Class divisions are also evident when Star's classmates are talking about what they did over spring break. Quote, "I hope none of them ask about my spring break. They went to Taipei, the Bahamas, Harry Potter World. I stayed in the hood and saw a cop kill my friend," end quote. Star feels left out here and also confused. She doesn't understand why her friends can be so dismissive and ungrateful about getting to travel places when she has to deal with the implications of being black in a poor neighborhood. While Star's friends' intersectional identities give them privilege, Star's intersectional identities give her oppression and pain. The kids at school held a protest for Khalil's death once it reached the news. Star's friends didn't protest for Khalil. She thought he was a drug dealer. "I mean, it's kind of messed up that we're protesting a drug dealer's death," she says. The white kids were just happy to miss class to go to the protest. Because of this, Star does not participate. A connection I made to the lecture content was when Star observed, quote, "In the kitchen, Mama speaks in her other voice on the phone," end quote. People use race to pit one another against each other. There's a strong them versus us mentality in Garden Heights. Mama was using her other voice to speak to white people because she wanted to sound more intelligent and speak like a white person. Star elaborates later on the novel when she says, "they" with a capital T. There's them and then there's us. She further emphasizes the divide between them and us. There's little to no connection between the two groups. Star struggles because she tries to fit in with both of them. This divide is also felt by author Bell Hooks, who explains, "When I was not desperately seeking to belong to this family community that never seemed to accept or want me, I was desperately trying to discover the place of my belonging. I was desperately trying to find my way home." Hooks felt the same pressures as Star to figure out where she belonged when class divides made it challenging for her to fit in. Class divide was also evident because Star's mom had to work long, hard hours in her job at the clinic. She saw lots of patients daily, many struggling with drug problems. Of the 8 million women in the labor force during the first decade of the 20th century, more than 2 million were black, women who suffered the combined disabilities of sex, class, and race. This was according to Davis in Working Women, Black Women, and the History of the Suffrage Movement. Black women face more struggles in the workforce and therefore remain trapped in a lower class. Star's mom was lucky. She was offered a higher paying job and could play a part in moving her family out of Garden Heights and into a nicer neighborhood. Something that we talked about during discussion section really relates to these ideas as well. We talked about, quote, class differences. Feminism has been popularized by social media, where it's trendy to be oppressed, rather than really dealing with it on a daily basis, end quote. Star's classmates thought it was trendy to protest because they were removed from the crisis. That's why they had no problem with protesting during the school day for the wrong reasons. They weren't actually there. They weren't actually friends with Khalil. They didn't actually live in Garden Heights and deal with race and class oppression daily. Finally, and arguably the most important, is the factor of race. Because Khalil was Black and the cop was white, the cop was racially motivated, and stereotypes such as that Khalil was armed or had drugs on him caused the cop to act irrationally and shoot Khalil when he made a small movement. Star's father sums up the system that is built to continually oppress people when he explains, when the Khalils get arrested for selling drugs, they either spend most of their life in prison or they have a hard time getting a real job and probably start selling drugs again. That's the hate they're giving us, baby, a system designed against us. The system is designed to keep people like Khalil trapped, giving them no other option than to sell drugs. Throughout this horrible experience, Star gains a lot of wisdom about the oppression against certain people in society. Black people, minorities, poor people, everybody at the bottom in society. We're the ones who get the short end of the stick, but we're the ones they fear the most. These are the groups most oppressed and disadvantaged. Star makes a good point when she says that even though they get the short end of the stick, other groups, such as white people, fear them the most. This was evident when the white cop claimed he only shot Khalil because he feared for his own life and thought Khalil was reaching for a gun. The white police officer's father did a news interview garnering pity for his son. The father said, quote, he always wanted to make a difference in the lives there. Star replied, funny, slave masters thought they were making a difference in Black people's lives too, saving them from their wild African ways. Star is fed up with the white superiority complex and the idea that Black people need to be saved. The white police officer just wanted to save the poor Black people from themselves. Star does not think they need saving. She thinks the messed up justice system needs saving. Star sums up the entire situation by saying this all happened because he assumed that we were up to no good, because we're Black and because of where we live. Rather than giving Star and Khalil a chance to explain things, the police officer immediately jumped to the conclusion that they were doing something illegal. Unfortunately, gun culture has been so normalized in society. It's a way for men to act on their masculine tendencies. It's excused because boys will be boys. As Bridges and Tober explain, in Mass Shootings, Masculinity, and Gun Violence as Feminine Issues, it is not just men with guns, it is American men with guns, the relationship among guns, men, and American culture. American men rely on their guns to participate in manly culture and hide their weaknesses. This is exactly what the police officer was doing that shot Khalil, relying on his gun to seem powerful and masculine in a situation that scared him, and he was only scared because of the assumptions he was drawing based on race and class. And finally, as Linda Burnham argues, in the absence of a gender justice framework in social justice organizing, one activist complained that in some communities of color, there's no reciprocity. Our issues are always expendable, always on the chopping block. For Black communities, their issues are only cared about if they directly affect white people. This is evident in the way that people only cared about Khalil's death when the protests posed a threat for the safety of white people. To conclude, there are three main intersectional identities that led to Khalil's murder at the hands of a white police officer and the struggles that Star faced afterwards to find her voice and speak up against the system that attempts to oppress her every single day. Her gender made it challenging for her to speak up because of the gender-based violence prevalent in her community. Her class presented an obstacle because she had to fight against ideas that Khalil deserved it because he came from the ghetto and supposedly was a drug dealer. Finally, her race was an obstacle because the cop was racially motivated and the justice system is racist. So what? Why does this matter? Well, this matters because innocent Black people are being shot every day at the hands of white police officers. In order to resolve this issue, we have to start talking about it and realizing that there is an issue in the first place. Hopefully, the justice system can be reformed and changes can be made. Thank you guys so much for tuning into my podcast. Allison out.